I've decided on a composition that is going to move us, and I'm paying attention to the thirds that we were looking at. Let's just draw them lightly on here. I don't want them getting in the way, but just for reference. When I'm looking here, I want to get this dark mass here coming into that third. And there's a big yellow mass coming in here. The dark mass is going to be here. And then we've got the final bunch of trees here, a little bit of foreground or background trees, and a tiny touch of blue mountain going to come in there. That's going to be where we're coming, right down into there. We have some foreground trees here, and these trees just continue with a couple of changes of color back in like that. And then we come back into here, which is a foreground bush. These browner, I don't know the name for them, they come down in here, and then the roadway after this little field will just come down here, just a hint of it, just to help lead us in, and it almost disappears here. So in terms of the massing, we're going to have the darkest masses and the most strongest contrast back in here. A few sky holes up there, these trees coming in near that little yellow tree going on in there. Some background there, this blue piece of mountain way into the background there, a few bits and pieces. So we're going to try to pull this right in here, that brightest yellow tree into the darkest dark, right into that point there. Then there's a few darks back in here as these trees are separated, like that. This whole thing is kind of darker. We don't want to make sure that we don't get a dark that starts dragging us out of the picture. We would just faint it out like that so it doesn't pull us out of the picture. This whole thing has the same stuff going on. There's a few places in the foreground where there's a few touches of green coming back in. We might get some of that bush off on that side. There's a little bit of complexity here of bushes and those things coming in, and then the road comes right in there. A couple of darks there, but not much, and a little bit of that gray stuff again, coming right up to about there. Now, although that doesn't read particularly as a finished drawing, what it does show is that we're coming in here. We tend to enter the painting. A roadway will certainly help us do that. It disappears here. We'll be taken across these dark lines here. Probably we'll end up going here first, but we will see this movement as a secondary movement, and we'll be pulled up into that part too. So I'm planning the whole picture around the idea of the movement of the eye in the entire picture plane. And what will be important is to emphasize this point so that that's where we will primarily be taken, but to create secondary interest throughout, but no point that becomes, say, so dark or interesting or dramatic just in the simple contrast that pull the eye back, say, to this point when you really want us to be coming here. So as we did on the thumbnail, I want to just take sort of some soft lines here to give the sense of these thirds, because we sort of planned our composition around that a little bit. And I wanted this big mass of yellow coming down here and finishing right here so that our center of interest is right in about here. A little bit here. I wanted to get this nice group of trees here coming round, and then having some of these background trees coming in here, and just a nice little piece of blue way off there, but not straight off in case it's too brilliant and pulls us out. Some grasses and so on in here. Then we're off into here. That other tree comes up here. There's a change in color between these two trees, but hardly any in value. There's a nice little green in there. I'm just scrubbing some of these points in, reference points, to make sure that I get what I want. I want to get these two road masses coming in over to one side, leading us into the painting, and there's another mass there. It comes up almost to that point. So we get the sense of that field here. This comes all the way down here, and the road is actually coming all the way down into the foreground. I'm going to take it down a little further too. It's really important at this point to take your time and make sure that you get the relationships you want, because the moment you start, you've got so many other things to think about that you'll just probably not notice it until at the end you say, oh my God, look what happened here, and then it's too late to do very much about it. Okay, so that's just giving me a really basic idea of where I want my masses to be. Now what I want to do is block them in really quickly so that we get within a few minutes a pretty clear idea of what our masses are, how they're placed, and then we can make a decision whether we're really off to a good start or whether we need to go back and think about it again. Because, as I say, most paintings are ruined right at the beginning because there's not enough planning there. Now I'm going to start off with a dark, a really dark green, or a really dark sort of purple actually, and I'm going to run it in here as the place where I want us to go. And I'm not going to worry in the least about any other of the details or anything. All I want is, when you squint at it, the simplest idea of the shape back in there. Then what I'm going to do, I'll clean this brush off. I want to get some of the color of those trees in behind it that are not as bright as the ones right up here, which is the edge that I really want us to notice. I want to put those in quite simply and get them a little darker back in here, so I can get that tree there to pop out a little bit. And then they go back up to being a little bit more yellow up on the top. So we're just laying this in really simply. Get in behind that thing there. And then we'll just bring them down a little bit. Now, I'm then going to paint this foreground, or this tree, over on one side, so it's a little brighter, stands out a little more. But I don't want it to compete with this edge here. So it's just sitting in there like that, and then there's a kind of slightly grayed out color that comes back in here. There, so that tree. And you see how simple the shapes are. Now we can put other details in there, but in the largest sense, it's the huge masses that we want to get in. Now I don't want to get my brightest bright in there just yet. What I want to do is scrub in this tree, which is so, it's pretty bright. Scrub this tree in with just a little bit of green in it, just to modify it right down here. And then I'll come back later and really push that edge. Now let me just do it now. I'm going to do it right now just to give the point of, that's where I want you to look, right in there. That's going to remain the center of interest, that relationship. And we'll adjust the edges as we go. Now you'll notice that a lot of the edges in this thing, certainly at this point anyway, are really, really soft. Edges tend to hold our attention, and or at least crisp edges hold our attention, because there's a strong contrast there. And you don't want too many places holding your attention, or it's going to distract from where you really want us to look. Now this gets quite dark right in there. It's quite dark back there. And then this yellow sort of comes back in there. Gets darker down into that spot. Now the tree next to it, you'll see, is about the same value, but it's not as intense. it's a paler yellow and not as bright a color. So I'm going to neutralize it with a tiny touch of purple, which is the complement of the yellow. So it's not quite so bright. It's not bad. Put a little bit of ochre in it. When you're going through this thing, take your time mixing the color. Don't get so excited about getting paint on there that you think, well, let's cover the canvas first and we'll think about color and things later. Because what you do is you start setting up conditions of incorrect colors that become so problematic as you go on, because at the time you've blocked the whole thing in, you really don't know what you've got. You've just got a bunch of chaotic colors up there. Now, here's the thing. I want us to be moving this way here. So what I'm going to start doing is taking this color here, oops, a little bit too much, and graying it out and making it a little bit darker as we go across, so that in fact the whole mass becomes like an arrow of darker to lighter moving you this way into the painting. Because it's a big simple mass here of various trees and things. I want to make sure that it gets a little duller as it goes out here too, so it holds our attention a little less. I just put a touch of that in there. Now, what I want to do down along the bottom is to separate these trees out from what's underneath them by getting a few shadow shapes coming back up into them this way. The shadow that's coming, the light's coming from above, even though it's a gray day, there's still light coming from the sky. It's going to be shadowed and darker underneath, and lighter on top. And I think I'm going to bring this down so it doesn't become too rounded there, and I'm going to bring a little bit more orange into this so it doesn't get too dark. Okay. Now I just want to get a couple of darks back in here because we're going to have a couple of places and I want them to overlap. You see, in this group, I'm painting from back to front here because each object, as it overlaps, has paint that comes up into, or leaves in this case, but a paint that comes up into the one above it. Because the sense of overlap is really, really important in getting a sense of depth. That this thing is in front of that thing, in front of that thing, in front of that thing, which moves us back into space. Now I want to mix a color here that's going to come all the way through here and just a little bit brighter, a little bit more intensity to the greens down in here. And it's just scrubbed all the way across here. Now on top of that, we'll put some of the other plants, the greens and the yellows and so on like that, but I just want to get something in there now. And the same thing for the green of the field behind all those things. Back in here, I want to get a value. It's about right, so I can pull this whole field in here, right down to this foreground bit here. Now there's a lot of other colors in there, and I'm going to put them in later. But I just want to get the planes established. The other thing I want to do is get these backlit bushes, chamises and whatever they are, here happening. And they're going on in there too. And then I want to completely simplify the shapes of these trees here. I'm going to make that a little cooler We're getting back here, although we're only back, a couple of 100 yards. Even at this point, we can start to use a little atmospheric perspective to cool our color and push the thing back. That nice dark shape in there. And then we just want a soft, cool gray, very, very simple gray, gray-green sort of shape. For the top of that tree, it needs to be a little lighter, in like that. And maybe for a little piece in here, and we'll take a sort of grayed out color in there, which we can add a couple of oranges to complete. There's aspens and so on back in there also. Then I just want to put a couple of darks in the bottom of those trees. So we have the lit side and the dark side of that tree, and the lit side and the dark side of that tree, the lit side and the dark side of that tree. And then I'm going to take a very cool blue and exaggerate this a little bit. Although if you look back there, the blue is very, very blue. I mean, the atmosphere has really cooled it off. And put in something, there's no question that we're pulling our attention back into the painting. Distance. I'm going to exaggerate that blue just a touch more too. Just to put that in there. And then I'm going to do what I was saying I wanted to do all along, which is just to bring that up into it, like that. And that's just to give the sense that there's real depth back into the painting. Now the sky is quite overcast, and so I'm not going to certainly have blue for the sky. I mean, the value that's up there now is probably pretty close. But I'm just going to mix up a gray, slightly warm gray, I think. There seems to be a touch of ochre in that sky. It's a little cool. Not using any medium as I go along here. Sometimes a touch of turpentine just to get in a wash underneath. That's better. It's nice warm ochre sort of color. And I'm just going to put that in there. I'm not going to vary it. I mean, we're so close to the horizon that the amount of change that occurs between the horizon, although I am going to take, come to think of it, just a little bit lighter and a little bit of cad yellow light just to put along the horizon there to differentiate it a little bit. Bring it up into the painting. Bring it down into that. And just bring that in overlaps down back into, just to soften those edges a little bit. Then I'm going to bring a little bit of sky back into here, and I'll be painting some other sky holes a little bit later. I'm not even sure what I'm going to do there yet, but let's just leave that for now. There is a nice green, dark green, that is coming back in here, and I like it. I'm going to put that in there. Tree that's in behind, and we'll just leave that for now. Maybe run that thing up just to soften that edge, and we'll leave that and maybe put a couple of sky holes or something in there later. I think while I'm thinking of it, I'll just continue this under here. A little bit of turpentine here. So I'm taking a second color, which is going to be this bush up here, and just kind of scrub in the middle value of it there, reserving some room for the places I want it to come up above. Maybe do the same, bring this a little darker in here. I want to bring a little of this color down into this next line of, I don't know the name of that weed, but it's dark. I want to leave some room for that. Now you see how small the change is between those two. This is slightly darker, this is slightly warmer green, but it certainly separates the two, one from the other, without us getting confused as to what's going on. I think I'll be bringing some of these greens in down here. Just for the time being, we'll do that. There's certainly some of this green coming up in here, and one or two places where it's coming here. Now, there's a secondary color running all the way through this, which is quite yellow. And I want to put this in and lighten it up so that we make really sure that this whole plane is standing out from the one behind it. That's going to be a green tree, which I will put in a moment. This stuff comes in through here. I want it defining that top edge. You need, if you're doing this, when things are fairly close together like this, you need to get paint on your brush every stroke or two, otherwise the two just start mixing and you just get something halfway between the two and not much happens. I want to get a little bit of red. It's a little alizarin mixed with green, so it's not very much, but it's hopefully enough. Amplify that a little bit. But just to get some of these reds in here without them jumping so much that they come away from the rest of the painting. Just like that. You might go back and touch those up with a little bit more later. There's a couple of places there where they are also. Now, I want to get the green tree in that I've kind of gone in advance of myself here. It's back in here. And I'm going to put it in a little brighter than that. I want this to be a place we go to look at, but not to attract too much attention. So even like that might be enough. You see how subtle that changes, and yet it may be just enough to say, oh yeah, we got a different kind of plant back there. It's in behind the one because you can see the little leaves and things coming up in front of it. But at the same time, it's overlapping and coming in behind. Then we've got a line of yellow up here in the foreground. We're getting close to the foreground. This plant here. Now we don't want too many hard edges way out here, but we want to keep the shapes interesting enough that when we get there and actually look at them, they're still interesting, but we're not confused about what part of the painting in terms of center of interest and so on that we're supposed to be looking at. Now I'm going to scrub in this kind of reddish gray color. And I guess to do that, what I'm going to do is, I find the easiest gray to mix, I don't have black on the canvas, or on the palette, is ultramarine blue and cad orange is pretty good at giving you a neutral gray about as quickly as anything. Of course, you can mix them with any set of complements, but that's pretty much the easiest, quickest neutral gray to get. And then, in this case, I've added a little bit of alizarin just to make it sort of on the red side. Now, when I squint at it, it's quite a bit darker than the greens around it. So I want to make sure I don't get too light here. We want to keep the red to it, so we're darkening it out, getting more alizarin in there. And then I think I'm going to try getting it in, not quite that dark. Test your colors out a few times. Don't sort of go in there too quickly with a color and then find out later that, oh God, I've painted half the painting in and it's all too light. Sort of test it against other things first if you can. Now there's some really nice shapes back in there, and I want to try to get them as I go. As the greens come in around them, and there's like the top edge of this whole thing that I want to get in. Comes down a little way. And then it gets quite dark back in here underneath this other tree here that let's get a little green in there. But we want to be careful that we don't get our attention sucked into this corner because of getting too dark a piece in there. I mean, you imagine you just put a big dark here, it would pull your attention into that, and it's obviously what you don't want at this point. I'm going to run some greens down into here that are, I suppose, coming from there. And then I'm going to mix a lighter ochre color, sort of the same as the one we had, but lighter, which is the next tier of these things down. And still a little tiny touch of alizarin in there. Still need to go warmer. I mean, you might have to check a color 3, 4, 5, 6 times before you start getting happy with the one you've got. And it's worth doing, because if you just go blundering ahead with whatever color comes first, you can just create chaos, because there's so many things to be thinking about up here anyway, without getting colors that are just so difficult to read. Now, I'm going to probably darken this a little bit and bring us in this way so it's a little lighter at this end and a little warmer. So it tends to pull us into the painting and not drag us out. And these things come all the way down till they start blending in with the grasses down below. And they're coming back up into here from time to time. Seem to be back into here. And then we need to go into where they start joining the ground. They seem to be getting darker again. That same color is going on over there, but can be kept very simple because we just have sort of the simplest. It's peripheral out there. I think we can extend that down a little further and a little darker, just so we get right down into the shadows of those, of that, whatever it is. And then I'm leaving these spaces so that we can get some greens coming back up into it. There's a couple of places maybe where it comes right down into it. Now I want to get some greens down into here, maybe not quite as dark as that, because we don't want it holding too much attention. And we don't want to get too much of this thing without some of the green coming back into it, so it becomes almost it just becomes too separate. It just doesn't look like it's part of the same field. We're lucky today in the sense that it's overcast and the light is even, And even though we've only been about 10 minutes so far, we're almost blocked in here. You can already see in what, 15 minutes or something like that, you can start to get a feeling for how these masses are going to work, how they're overlapping, and whether we've got the, potentially a painting or not, or whether we've got some serious problems. Now, when I've completely got rid of the white, I'll stop and I'll spend a couple of minutes just looking at it and seeing, oh yeah, well this isn't working, or it needs that, or adjusting this, or because you can probably still solve something early on in this process. You haven't invested too much. But the more you keep painting into it and painting into it and painting into it, the more you get attached to the things you've painted, and even more, the more you get stuck up on details, which are probably taking you away from the big picture anyway. So before I get to anything like detail, I don't consider these modulations of color detail. I call them just, it's separating the masses, but it's not, it's certainly not detail at this point. I'm just trying to modulate the color, get some interesting color changes without getting it too busy. Now I want to bring us round to this point, and so I'm going to add some slightly more intense color here to pull us over to this road and make sure that we use it to pull us back through the painting like that. I might just break this in a couple of spots there, and I'll just finish the green down on the very bottom. Just put in a nice rich mixture of orange and green, quite a gray color, just to finish this part down here. Get a couple of pieces coming up, overlapping. Get rid of the white and under there. Maybe don't get too much of that going right across. Some more of this color down there. So you can see we're pretty close to having completed the whole block in. And we can start to evaluate what's going to happen here, whether we're on a good, whether we're heading for success or disaster. I don't want these roads to get too this little path to get too emphasized. So I've covered it a lot here. And I'm going to mix up a pale pinky gray sort of a color. It may conflict a little with that, so I'm going to make sure that it's maybe on the purple side. In fact, I don't want it to just sort of come into this one. I don't want it to be the same color. I do want it to look like dirt, and I do want it to look like it's disappearing back behind here. And I'm going to bring it a little bit darker as it comes forward so it doesn't attract so much attention. So this is just like a little bit of dirt road there. Maybe I could put a little piece there. Then I'm going to start darkening it out as it comes forward. So we still see what it is, but it holds our attention less and less. And it's gotten pretty spotty down in here too, so I'll just leave it like that so it doesn't hold too much attention. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stand back and just look at what my eye does and just decide what I like about it, what I don't like about it. Now, the main thing that's causing me a problem right now is this color here, because it's starting to jump and pull my attention where in fact I want us coming either like this or really back to here. And I'm going to create some lights and darks and sky holes and trunks and little bits of yellow and so on in here. So it's pretty obvious this is where you want me to go, or I want you to go. But right now, I'm not very happy either with this part or this part. And I think what I'm going to do, just for the sake of trying it, is just to simplify that whole section just for now. I don't really like this color to start off with, so I'm just going to come in here and simplify it first this way. All this stuff a little bit too. And it's just like the weight of the brush is almost what you use to describe this. And often, if it's plants, using it in an upward motion because that's the way they grow. Now I'm going to go a little darker. I think I said I was going to do that and never did. A little darker over on this side, just to make sure we don't get pulled over there. And then these things, I'm going to soften them on that edge, soften some of those edges, and then I'm going to stand back and look at it again. Because at this point, I can start establishing and feeling all these things and seeing if it's working and saying, yes, now if it's working, all I need to do is put a bit of a dark there, a bit of a light there, a bit of a dark there, and the whole thing can start to come together. If it's not working at this point, what happens is you're sort of trying to adjust this and trying to adjust this, and this doesn't work, and the whole isn't working. And so by putting in parts, it's very unlikely that the parts are going to add up to a better whole than just coming into a whole simply like this and proceeding from that point forward. I think we can get rid of the road almost entirely here because we can't really even see it. It just kind of goes into grass there. I want the main place you would see the road to be right here. Now the one place also right now what's happening is it's unclear, it's ambiguous, whether this is in front of this or this is in front of that. I mean, obviously this is in front of this because this is in front of this, but somehow just visually right now, this one seems to be jumping forward because it's brighter, this is darker, and it's grayer. This thing tends to be jumping forward. So that's one thing we're going to have to make sure that we establish, that this whole mass starts to come in front of that mass. But you see, in terms of what we're doing, we can see a mass here, 2 or 3 simple ones there, a mass, the dark is a mass. This whole thing reads as a mass moving this way. Another slightly foreground one, another one here, and then this whole one kind of reads as one in there. So it's actually pretty simple, although you could obviously you could keep going, adding branches and leaves and twigs. You could do it for months and just get it incredibly detailed. It's not going to help you if this section, this place in the making of a painting isn't working. Now, I'm going to start going forward here, and I want to make sure I'm going to get a few things going on here. Definitely I need to make sure this thing comes up in front of that. What I want to get now is a few things in here in a peripheral way that says, okay, there's vegetation of various kinds going on here, but I'm going to pull a little bit of more attention here, so we wrap around there, create more interest here, and certainly some more in there, a touch more there, and then we may be finished. the sun's come out here, and it's changed a lot in terms of the light. And so you don't want to chase the light. You don't want all of a sudden jump after a new effect, because the moment, and you know from your experience in painting, you change one thing, everything else starts to change. And before you know it, you have to change the whole painting to make one little change. So there the sun's going back in, and we're just going to stay with our original idea. Now this road is coming around like that, and right now it looks like it's in front. I want to just put something like that in there to indicate that it's in behind. Those little overlaps will help. Before I finish up in here, which is where I want us to go, I want to make sure the whole painting is working, so that when I put those final touches there, it's like, good, it's done. And right now I'm having a problem with this thing here, as I mentioned before, reading in front, and I think I should solve this before I go back there to actually finish the painting. I think I'll take a slightly smaller brush. Up until now I've been using about a number 8 brush. That's the only, it's big. It's, I'm going to stick a couple of trunks just out here. And what I want to try to do, and to be honest with you, I'm not quite sure how I'm going to paint this yet. I'm looking at it as paint, and I'm just looking at whether I can pull it off the way I'm seeing it, as a series of, maybe not quite that dark, a series of things that are running here in the foreground and coming down into there, actually getting lost down into here. And in a sense, I am getting caught up in some pretty small pieces, but I'm trying to read it still very much as shape and not detail. And I want to clump them a little bit so they don't get too spotty up there. I wish I knew the name of those weeds, but we'll pull these things down into here, and I think we'll and hopefully they'll be moving us down into this part rather than, say, away from it. There are some lighter ochres in around them, and I want to make sure I get also so it doesn't all get too dark back in there. And a little coral of dogs back there helping us. Now that's reading a little better in terms of just pulling us across without getting too busy. Now there's another layer of them in front of that, you'll notice, that are actually darker still, but I don't want to get them too dark. It's like that's the first layer, then there's sort of a dip that's happening back there. And then these ones come in front, and I think I'm very much de-emphasize these. See, color's not as dark, but I need to do something to create enough interest back there. Getting in front of me again. And to pull us down so that this isn't too much of just something that runs across, but is something that's running down and forward into the foreground more. And now we're going to get that more ochre color in and around some of them, so they don't stand out too much. Probably in front of the camera. Not quite that dull. So I want to make sure I'm seeing it as a shape and not getting too busy with it. But I want it to be an interesting spot. Now it's sort of standing out in front a little too much, and I think I'm going to take some of this green and bring it back in front, just in a couple of spots. Like this thing actually is working okay. I think what I need to do is just get a couple of lights coming back up in here. Oops, maybe not quite that light. Let's scrape that guy back. Just breaking up this thing a little, as if there's plants coming forward into it. I think we're still okay. What we need is a little dark underneath those, underneath these, showing that they're plants that are. Do you see I'm carving now sort of negative shapes so that those green plants are coming out away from the ones in front. And I have to just keep standing back to see if it works. I can't tell from 2 feet away. I can only tell what an idea is. I can try anyway, from a couple of feet away, and then go in there and try it and see if it works. So be sure you keep moving back and looking at your paintings from 8-10 feet away. In many respects, of the whole painting, this part right here, solving this piece here, was really the one that I could see was going to be the challenge from the start. And so it doesn't get too busy, and yet it's still in the foreground, it's still interesting. And that's just what we're trying to solve right now, and I think we're almost there. Great. I'm not going to do anything else particularly the foreground. I'm sort of happy with that, or happy enough for now. Might just put a simple shape there. Then I see a couple of sky holes, which I'm going to make. You don't want to make the sky holes too light, certainly not as light as they'd be over here, or they're going to jump out, because they're surrounded by other things. But I want to get a couple of these sky holes coming through here. I think I still need to bring this one down a little bit. It's still reading a little too much like a green thing that's sort of hovering in space rather than a tree in behind the one we've got here. So that might help a little bit, particularly if I bring this one out in front of it here. So the overlap is there, so it's clear what's in front of what, just as we've done over here. I'd like to take that gray that I had before and exaggerate it. It wasn't quite enough. It's in there somewhere. Okay, what I'm finding now is that this thing is reading like, this is overlapping, but I need to pull some information down into here, and then maybe use this brush. I want to make sure that when we get down here, we've got enough interest to say that it's worth being the center of interest. I want to close that hole at the top. I just realized that thing is probably not doing us any good up there. This green can probably come in here. And the thing is, you know, it's interesting. I wanted to bring us all here, and I've actually exaggerated this thing so much that it's holding too much attention when we finally do get to it. And when you come to these last few spots, I mean, if this is where you want us to look, you may have to adjust a few things, just getting it so there's enough interest there that when we get there it's beautiful, but at the same time hasn't got too busy. Normally when I do a plein air painting, I do it in an hour and a half, and that's usually the finished product. In this case, because of the cameras and the talking and organizing and so on like that, I got home and found that there was certain things about this painting that didn't feel quite finished to me, quite right. One is the mountain at the back, the second is the dark in behind the trees in the background, and the third is that green bush sort of in the midground, plus the fourth is just the whole foreground part I found a little rough. So I clarified the blue mountain at the back, just in a clean, simple stroke. I darkened that little mass of shadow in behind the yellow tree and put in a couple of trunks just to clarify that in terms of when we got there, it's really clear. That's the center of attention, I think more so than before. So here I softened the bush on the far right-hand side so it didn't pull our attention out. Got rid of that little green bush, which I felt was just kind of hovering in space in behind the foreground bushes. Extended that next bush a little bit. So that element now is just pulling us into the painting rather than just sitting as a flat element in the foreground. Here I just simplified the foreground, delineated the left-hand weeds and bushes a little bit, and the road now leads us back towards the back of the painting rather than being a little bit too distracting. Even with these changes, I still have problems with this painting. I find the right-hand side is just dull and uninteresting. By cropping it further, we get a better composition, tighter. You can see this search to create something that works, something that's alive, continues from start to finish. But this demonstration has given you a feeling for the process in action. Let's finish with a short tour of a gallery of my paintings, interiors, figures, landscapes, all done from life, that I like, and I think exhibit a strong structure of value masses that create engaging paintings. The artist Charles Hawthorne had a great quote. He said, "There's only so many notes in music and so many colors in painting. But it's the arrangement that makes the masterpiece. Composition is that arrangement. And if it's not working, no amount of fancy brushwork or bold color is going to help you. This is it. This is bedrock. This is where you structure paintings from." Now, you won't master all the ideas in this video in one viewing. And perhaps 6 months or a year from now, you'll have new insights into it. But if you take some of the ideas here and give them some careful attention and study, you'll find that your compositions become more engaging and your paintings dramatically improve. So good luck practice, and above all, have fun.